Managers of Reddit, in what unexpected ways have job candidates impressed you during interviews? I own a small company and am very hands-on. I was expecting someone to come for an interview. I had a piece of equipment break down and I was working on it as this person showed up. He jumped right in and gave me a hand fixing it while we talked. He's been employed with me for 12 years now. Was doing a phone screen. Extremely qualified candidate, but listed a previous employer as the Atlantic Ocean. I asked what he meant, because WTF, and he said, I was a fisherman for 2 years, and moved around a lot. I met a lot of great people, and learned a lot, but I hated it. I didn't get to think through complex problems, and I wasn't really helping anyone. It's what convinced me to get my PhD. I didn't want to leave that part of my work history blank, and I find that it's better if I bring it up, since it's the driving force behind where I am today. Went from this guy seems weird to dang, I have a lot of respect for him in 30 seconds flat. You may be my boss, but the sea will always be me first mistress. A friend of mine went for an interview with a big company. She had freshly graduated and was terribly nervous. However, the interview went well and she was selected over other candidates. Years later, during a casual conversation with her interviewer, she asked what had made him recruit her. You were so nervous and awkward. I felt sorry for you, came the frank reply. This is so wholesome, yet so wrong. I was hiring engineers right around the time the USSR collapsed. This was East Coast, and there were a lot of Russian Jews being sponsored on some special visa program but not exactly sure of the timing. Often those candidates were not at all qualified, but there was no way to check work history and they had local help making their resumes look right, so an in-depth interview was critical. Anyway, I interviewed one engineer, and he seemed competent, and after asking him questions, I pull out some project sheets to show him what we made at this company. One project was a very specialized tool for the semiconductor industry. He took one look and said, oh yes, I designed that tool. I was confused, but he claimed to have designed this tool which I knew for a fact was designed by my company. He then started telling me about one feed mechanism which was very unreliable and how it gave him a lot of problems. He really did know it by sight. It turns out the Soviets bought a few years earlier and he was the guy responsible for reverse engineering and copying it. I hired him, but in truth he had a hard time understanding that the Soviets were copying everything from the West, even though that is exactly what he was doing over there. Once in a while the subject of a company or technology would come up and how it was developed by Intel, or whoever, and he would say, oh yes, that is what they told you, as if I was the one who had been lied to for years. I think it's interesting that the guy didn't differentiate between designing it, creating something new, and reverse engineering, copying someone else's work, but it's not trivial to do. Dude showed up late for the interview, hair all disheveled and his white shirt dirty. A woman on the interstate had a blowout in front of him, and he stopped to change the tire for her, apologized profusely for being late and looking like crap. Ended up hiring him, and he was a great employee. His quality character showed throughout his time working for me. Also had another guy who listed Times Person of the Year 2006 inches on his resume. Hired him, too. Times Person of the Year 2006. I had to Google that, but hot dang, that's corny, but still hilarious. Although I have a distinct feeling this would have been overused around that time. Not me, but a friend went to an interview for a trampoline park I worked at as well. The manager that does the interview tries his best to be intimidating despite him being a really relaxed guy. He's a big 6 feet 2 inches and kinda rounded, so it normally works for him. 5 minutes into the interview and he asked, do you have any experience with kids? My friend says I was a kid once. Manager started dying. He got the job. After a decent interview, this kid had a great moment of honesty and said, look, I've made mistakes. I'm 28 and I work at a video store and I have a bachelor's in music. I realized over a year ago that I needed to get it together. I just need someone to give me a shot and they won't be disappointed. I appreciated his honesty and offered him the job on the spot. One of the most ambitious and hard-working people I ever employed. He was quite annoying, but nevertheless a good hire. My manager told me that I impressed him by asking how many people left his group over the past year and why they left. I honestly thought it was going to pee him off the moment I asked and wished I could take it back. Since it was only 2 people, I asked him why each of them left. He had to explain that one of them was basically someone who hated working there and why they hated working there to me. The other guy just moved somewhere closer to home for more money. Side note, my favorite question to ask is what will my day typically be? Imagine I come in, hang up my jacket, and sit down at my desk. What do I start on and how does the day typically go? The main reason I ask this question is so they get an image in their head of me working at their company. I feel like it's a good question, but that's just my own assumption. Every summer I usually advertise for a bilingual student. Of all the applicants, only one has sent me a cover letter in both languages. I couldn't read it but was impressed at the thought of it. It's amazing how just the right amount of ingenuity and effort can make even the largest of differences. And Muga Uzbek Sim Bilaz Mnugini Azi Hyena Yuksi Yeln Wahgudi Epihan by Falzim Niksai Yaloim. In a company that I used to work for, interviews were scored. The candidate got points for education, experience, interview skill, etc, etc. There was always 5 points for receptionist. Quite simply, the receptionist out the front would be able to give a mark out of 5. Guy walks up and says Mr. Smith is expecting me while talking on his phone. He is probably getting 0 points. Guy who, when called into the interview, leaves the waiting room in a mess, but is otherwise polite, 2 points. etc. We once had a candidate get 10 out of 5 bonus points from the receptionist. As the guy got out of the lift, a staff member got out in front of him and dropped her load of files she was carrying. The guy immediately stopped, helped her collect everything, and helped her tidy stuff up. Then when he was in the reception waiting area, the coffee man came by. He comes by every day to see if anyone wants to buy coffee. The candidate asked the receptionist what the staff member's name was, and arranged for her to be sent a coffee. He got the job. He also got the girl, who he is now married to. The most bizarre interview I ever had went like this. I sat down to talk to the director and assistant director of the department I wanted to join. It was for a radio production job. They looked me dead in the eye and asked, if this office were on fire and you had to save only one of us, who would you save? I thought about this for a while, asked a few questions about the scenario, and gave my answer. The director stood up, reached behind me on a whiteboard and tallied off another tally mark under her name. They had asked every candidate this question and had a competition to see how many random candidates would save them in the fire. I got the job, by the way. Interviewee hadn't shown up yet. My boss and I walked outside so he could smoke, and we see this guy, who looked like he had been in a fight with a ball mill, jogging towards our building carrying a backpack. I recognized the guy as I had done his first interview as the interviewee who didn't show. Long story short, when he pulled up for his interview, he caught 2 buttheads cutting the top of the company owner's convertible and stealing his backpack with his computer inside. We watched the security footage and hired him. Got his buddies to help him out with the interview. I had a guy come in and when I asked if he had any prior merchandising experience said, "You know, quarter Swede, I'll be honest with you, I've never worked in merchandising. I don't even know what merchandising is. I've been a mechanic all my life. Look at my hands. I'm a hard worker who just moved here from California looking for a better life for my wife and kids. My son was getting into some bad stuff back there and I knew the only way to get him out of it was to move far away. They're my life. I hope you give me a chance to prove myself. I'll be the most reliable and hardest worker you've seen. I can't afford to let my family down." The guy was shaking like a leaf. As a father, I related to his story and it impressed me at the lengths he went to for his son and family. I hired him on that hunch and he was and is still an amazing asset. He's only part-time now because he and his wife have been making over 6 figures year over year with their clearance baby clothes and accessories reselling eBay business. I'm so proud that he was able to better himself and them. It really brings joy into management and is partly why I love it. You are a good person. Thank you for making humanity slightly better. New college grad started talking about politics and legal theory for a receptionist job. I was the managing attorney at the firm. After 5 minutes I realized that she was more intelligent than I was and was probably going to be way more successful than me. I did everything I could to hire her, but the firm owner said no because she'd be bored and leave in 3 months. Sigh. I totally had ideas of trying to keep her through law school and use her brain to do all the annoying legal work. I guess it wasn't meant to be. Sounds like a smart boss more than anything. My manager had me interview a new incoming engineer. By the time he got to me at 1 PM for our lunch, he had interviewed with 6 other people, engineers, managers, and VPs of the company. I told him, look, you're probably technically qualified, but I will let the others decide that. My role is now to see if you're sarcastic enough for the team. He rolled with an hour of sarcasm, jokes, and nonsense. We hired him that day. My actual instructions were to make sure this guy is not too much of an butthole. He was by far the nicest guy of the bunch of us. I was hiring a summer intern and had 2 final candidates who had passed phone screens and were coming in for in-person interviews. I asked my favorite question, what did you do to prepare for this interview? Candidate A, guy who goes to an Ivy League school and went to the same prestigious local high school as a few team members, who were all pulling for him to get the job, said I looked up the company website for any recent news and looked you up on LinkedIn to make sure I had a good sense of who I was meeting with and what's going on in your world. Perfectly reasonable and standard answer, if a bit boring. Candidate B, girl who goes to no-name Midwest school, said in the phone screen, you asked me a question about the future direction of your industry and I didn't feel like I gave a really good answer because I didn't know enough about it. So I spent the weekend reading articles to learn more about what's happening now and I feel like I have a better understanding of what you're working on. She then went on to amend her answer and explain what she had learned. It was clear she wasn't just regurgitating information and had actually spent time thinking about what she read. That impressed the heck out of me and I pushed hard to make sure we hired her. She was an excellent intern and I am still in touch with her. Amazing how you have to so far above and beyond just to get unpaid work these days. Another pizza story. Kid walks in on my day off to apply for a job. One of my drivers grabs a blank sheet of paper and starts asking him questions like the following. Answers included. Q. Do you have your own oven mitts? A. I can get some. Q. Do you have any bow stealth skills? A. I used to play with nunchucks as a kid. Q. What is your favorite dinosaur? A. Licholotopus. There were a few others that I don't remember but I hired the guy sight unseen for his sense of humor. I ended up making him a shift manager and he lasted longer than I did. Sounds like you got real intimate. I once got hired for accidentally saying we instead of you guys when talking about the great customer service Microcenter gives. We need a Microcenter in NC. Esperoli, please. I will give anything for one. One of my staff was doing a rehire interview. We work for a residential property. He made the entire property in the Minecraft and pitched it as part of his presentation. Yeah, we rehired him. I look for whether or not someone can figure out how they would solve a problem, rather than if they know the answer to the problem. I don't need to hire someone who knows everything already, just someone who knows how to figure it out. If someone can calmly lay out a plan for figuring out how to solve a problem, that will always impress me. I'm big on hypotheticals. I've had a couple of people ask if they can use my whiteboard and begin diagramming out a solution and you can tell they've done this a million times before. I work in a part of IT where there is a shortage of skilled folks for the amount of roles open. Most folks act like they are the smartest person in the room and I need to sell them on my company. Simply doing research about the company, our strengths, our culture, and being prepared for the interview with a list of questions is unexpected. I have received a grand total of 100 thank you note post interview. He got hired. Pro tip: ask your interviewer what they like about the company they work for. From the other point of view, here's how I got the job that I have now. Precursor: I didn't have the qualifications, but had some in-kind experience. That is, I worked as an insurance broker and was applying to be an insurance underwriter. These two types of jobs work together. Anyway, I first met with 2 dad-type managers. I gave them the impression that I was personable and would get along with my potential business partners, but that wasn't enough to seal the deal. They asked me why I wanted to work with them and I told them the truth. I lived an hour away and was looking for an excuse to move. I had recently met a girl who lived close to their office and I was falling for her. This was the push that we both needed so that we could be together rather than long distance. They were brought and gave me a shot. A year and a half later and I'm about to get a promotion. We're getting married in a few weeks and we've got a baby on the way. I call it a win. That seems kind of like when you're writing code and you're looking at some sloppy spaghetti code and you figure out that you can account for a bunch of different edge cases with a very simple function and you absolutely nail what should take 50 lines in a single program, just beating the crap out of a whole host of things with one go. Years ago I was interviewing this young fella for a waiting position. I asked him standard question I remember someone asked me once, "Why would you like to work for us?" "Because I need money," he replied. I don't understand why this normally doesn't fly at interviews. In my teens I was interviewing for a job as a cashier at a gas station. The interviewer asked me where I saw myself in 10 years. I said not working in a gas station. Got the job. I was hiring a web developer in the early days of the internet to write web applications in Perl. He said that he loved Perl, but in his previous job there wasn't much call for it. It was Perl before swine, if you will. I don't get it. We were 20 somethings interviewing someone quite a bit older for a technical position, so it was already a little awkward, and his resume had the usual list of 3-letter acronyms, which usually inspires me to pick one and ask them to explain it in substantial detail, because most of the time it ends up being along the lines of, "Oh, I use FTP to download files sometimes." So instead he goes into extreme detail on the thing I asked about, well beyond what I'd have been able to provide. And we were all suitably impressed and asked how he knew so much about it. He said, "Oh, if you look up RFXXII you'll find I'm the author. I invented that." Pulled out a banjo and sang all his answers in an Appalachian accent. Hired him as head cashier. I later had to let him go. HR forced my hand since he exposed himself to a customer's pet dog. I do have questions, but I don't really want answers. I want to giggle like a child at what the train of thought was to expose himself to a dog. I was the unorthodox candidate of this scenario, trying to get a job in the finance department. Sat in with the CFO and the director of internal audit, both football guys. So I was able to talk intelligently about football with them. Got to the part where we were talking about experience with Excel. I was fairly proficient and said I use it for fantasy football calculations. Impressed at the detail and use of formulas, pivot tables, etc. to determine drafting. Nerdy, I know, but their college teams were my college team's rival. So when they asked if I was a fan, clearly they already knew since my alma mater was on the resume. I said I hated their team and ranted for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Later found out that I was qualified for the job, but what sold them was that I was not an esquisser and didn't attempt to suck up to them by pretending I was something I wasn't, like a fan of their team just to attempt to get the job. Still working there 5 years later with a couple of raises. Biggest lesson I learned that day was that although you might be technically qualified, don't pretend to be a person you aren't. Honesty and being politely blunt is something that people respect. Just to be clear, I wasn't being a dong when I was ranting about college football, haha. It was friendly banter. Don't pretend to be a person you aren't. Honesty and being politely blunt is something that people respect. I'd say this depends heavily on the field at hand. Interviewer: so what will you do for this company? Candidate: what will you do for this company? Interviewer: under breath, oh crap. I'll hire the best candidate. Back at ya. Candidate did only so-so in the design interview, then in last 5 minutes asked if they could show me a project they had worked on over the weekend. They had built a full working prototype of our product, using a programming language they taught themselves. Sealed the deal. Hired. A man miserably failed a tech question. Just could not answer a mundane item he should know based on the resume. A few minutes later asked what the answer was because he knew he got it wrong. His honesty and curiosity made me hire him. Anyone working doesn't have to know every detail of their job perfectly. You can always Google a formula or look up code online. Takes a really smart person to have that curiosity. I'm a graduate assistant in the campus rec field, and what a lot of people don't realize is that assistantships in this field are actually quite competitive. As I'm finishing up my program this summer, we looked this past semester for my replacement and narrowed it down to 4 final Skype interviews. The girl who ended up being our final choice was very personable with us. At this point in the process, all of the candidates were qualified for the position, but we wanted someone who'd fit in well and really gel with the office culture we had going. So basically, we wanted someone who could have a conversation in the interview and not just spout off their bullet points. This girl was so easy to talk to and engaging, and we ended up having a conversation about our favorite Netflix shows, her top being Parks and Rec and The Office, mine and my supervisor's favorite shows. It was tough deciding who to choose, but this girl just knocked it out of the park by sending us the best thank you email I think I've ever received. In her email she was incredibly sincere and passionate. She even quoted Leslie Knope when referencing her passion, and made it very clear that our staff was exactly the kind of people she'd been looking for. It was incredibly honest and caring. After that email it was an easy decision who to choose. This goes along with something a director told me once. The best thing you can do in any interview is show that you're a people person and can get along with others. You can be the most qualified person out there, but no one wants to work with someone they can't get along with. Had 2 candidates for a summer intern position to write a simple program for our department. Candidate 1 came from a good school, was articulate and impeccably turned out. Candidate 2 was less polished and stumbled over a few questions, but to the question of what he did in his spare time, his eyes lit up and he became more animated as he talked about his side interest in writing apps. My co-interviewer and I were unanimous in deciding to hire candidate 2. It was a decade ago. Both co-interviewer and I have left the company. Candidate 2 is still there, now manager in the IT department. Used to manage a bong shop. Interviewing a college junior, Italian, Long Island, frat, lacrosse hockey type guy. You probably know the type. Asked him what he'd do with his time when there were no customers in the store, and he pointed to our flat screen. We played movies on mute with music on the stereo, and said I'd probably bring in my Dragon Ball Z DVDs. My response was the right answer was I'd Windex the shelves, but I'm 100% going to hire you. We can call the rest of the interview off. I don't know the type. In a final interview for a call center agent, she said, "Can you show me what the work is like? A couple of examples." As the interview was over Skype and I shared my screen, we went over real cases and she was able to say what she would do and how it looks easy and fun. One has to love that type of curiosity. Hiring an entry-level graphic designer, web designer. Ad says literally, attitude is more important than experience or education, but talent and desire are non-negotiable. We're offering $45k to start, so not bad at all in this market. 400 plus resumes. 39th interview. Me. Know anything about JavaScript? Prospect. Number. But give me 3 days and let me show you what I can learn. Hired him on the spot and no regrets. Also managed to start him at 50k. HR didn't want to, but man, that I'll prove it attitude got to me. Attitude and talent plus honesty are really hard to find in one package. 3 days later you were blown away by the greatest hello world script you've ever seen in your life. I work in retail. Had a teenager come into my store and ask for an interview for any work experience opportunities. It was a bit of a weird question, so I pulled him into an office and picked his brain. He explained he has no experience and an average educational background. Just wanted the opportunity to do some work experience, gain some knowledge and potentially put it on a CV to leverage a job. I hired him straight away based on his attitude and gave him paid shifts starting the following week. He ended up being the best employee I had for the 2 years I worked in that store. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.